Alright, back to it. I had to go get a fan. Theoretically, I could have done without it, but I was getting a little warm, a little sweat, you know, sweat kind of thin layer starting to develop. Not really warm enough to have the AC on, so just a fan. But some police officers, from what I've heard, again, this is a good story, really illustrates a point. Even if it's not actually true, it's plausible, and you get the idea. So, guy's training at the range. He's taught when his gun misfires, jams, to get all the cartridges out, line them up, check the gun, disassemble it, assemble it, and stuff like that. And that's how to take care of the issue. Got that trained into him. So, in an emergency situation where you don't have a lot of time to think and reason things out, and you have to rely on some prior habits to help you through a situation. That's what he did. He's in a gunfight within one person or more. His gun jams. So what does he do? Lines up the cartridges on top of the car, disassembles his gun. Then the other guy comes around and, unfortunately kills him. But so the department had to learn that you got to train people in a different way. In an emergency, you don't do that. And you got to train for a real life situation, not just go through some step-by-step thing. In some situations, yeah, absolutely, you can take the cartridges out, line them up, blah, blah, blah. But that's not a habit you want to get for a real life gunfight. So, again, this is not like no one does this, or we've all been doing the EA all along, or whatever. No, there's more going on than what we know. Just lots of people, even scientists, cutting edge scientists of the day, at one time believed the sun goes around the earth. That was what they thought they had to believe, and it was reasonable. Some people nowadays scoff at it or laugh at it or think it's silly, but that shows no understanding of what it really takes to understand that the earth goes around the sun. Just because some people believe it and everyone knows it, quote unquote, without really knowing what no means. People believe, but not everyone knows that the earth goes around the sun. People don't understand understanding. You're here looking at something in the world and you understand this, but then understanding that is a higher level of abstraction. To understand what it is to understand something is different than just to understand it. But people believed that the sun goes around the earth, and that was, in their context, what they had to believe. Just like we believe certain things now, and that's fine. We don't know everything. We got to learn to bring things into play, just as people did back then. So, at the time, if you think about it more and look what it really takes to understand the issue, if the Earth is going around the sun, okay, the ancient Greeks had already figured out approximately how big the Earth was, radius, diameter, and all that, and hence could get approximate volume. How big the moon was, how far the moon was from the Earth, how far the sun was from the Earth. And so they could figure out if it takes a year for the Earth to go around the sun, and the Earth is this far away, they could get an idea of how fast it was going. I don't remember the thing right now in my head, but it'd be really damn fast. And if the Earth is going around, how do you explain night and day? Okay, if the sun's going around the Earth, clearly, we can explain night and day. I have a good explanation. Day, night, clear. And we're here and we don't feel like we're moving. And if the earth is still, that makes sense. So the ancient Greeks would think, day, night, and a lot of other people. And we feel like we're still, and so, it must be still, and so on and so forth. And in contrast, you can think, if we're riding along on a horse and we drop a ball, the ball goes straight down. And if the earth was moving around the sun, and if you drop a ball, why didn't it fly away like it does if you drop a ball like off a horse or on a carriage? You got some Roman carriage, you're riding along, and you drop a ball, it falls, and you leave it behind. Why doesn't that happen like with stuff that we drop? Why didn't it fly away? Because the earth would be going at like, I forget, 5,000 miles an hour or something, And if you drop a ball, you're going to be far the hell away from that ball if the earth is moving, right? You got to explain that. Or if you have to explain night and day by the earth rotating, as it's going around. Well, what happens when you're on something that turns? Think of those things we used to play on when we were kids that aren't around nowadays, unfortunately, because they're supposedly dangerous. But it's a wheel or a big disc. You run. Some people get on it and they hold onto a rail, and some other people run and get it going fast, and they jump on and you spin around. On something like that, you put something on the ground. If it's not fastened, it's going to fly off. So if you're spinning around, why didn't everything just fly off into space? Explain. They couldn't. Without an explanation for that, you cannot say you're certain that the earth goes around the sun. There are these major significant things that cannot be understood or explained, at the time. Now people know. And one thing, as I've said, that led to some of this was thinking, as I brought up with Galileo, Copernicus, and with J.J. Gibson, when something's moving and we're observing it, we got to consider perspective. When we grasp some motion, is it it's moving and we're still, or are we moving and it's still, or are we both moving? Or maybe we seem to be still, but we're both moving, Something like that. Like you're on a boat and it's moving and you're sitting in some room and you can't see the ocean or anything, and you're both sitting there and you think you're not moving when the boat's moving, so you are, right? So there are situations like that to consider, and when people finally grasp, as I say, that the earth and the sun falls into that class of things, we got to look at it conceptually. We got to look at those things to figure out what the earth is doing. These things are alike. The earth moving, like seeing the sun move with respect to the earth, is like these other things I said. You riding a horse by something, or someone riding a horse by you, or two people riding a horse past each other, and so on. Those things have to be considered. And then you got to take into account gravity. So people knew that when things hit, when they come into contact, there'd be a force. But people at one time would explain the fact that something fell by, they didn't know gravity because they didn't know force at distance. When finally people learn about magnets and study them, and it's in the scientific literature that, magnets can affect each other without touching. They don't got to be in contact for there to be a force. You can feel it. You can get magnets and feel them pulling to each other, or you can feel the resistance. Sometimes it's like, if they're strong enough, it's really, really hard to push them together or pull them apart. The north and south ends, north to north, south to south, or north to south. So we need that idea that we can feel on our own again, we have evidence, we have direct experience of the evidence. We feel the magnets pushing apart. It's not some hypothetical thing. It's not Descartes Cartesian, like make it up in your head. No, it's looking at actual reality and seeing what does reality do. It's being Aristotelian, Galilean, not Platonic, not Kantian, not Cartesian. It's being like J.J. Gibson, Galileo, Marie Curie, and others, looking at the evidence of the senses and drawing our conclusions from there. So we're sure that nothing in our intellect was not first in our senses. So once you got something like that in your context of knowledge, and you know it, then you can think, maybe the earth pulls on people like magnets can pull or push on each other. So there's this thing we can call gravity. And of course, there's differences nowadays. Like there's the Einsteinian approach to explaining gravity, some things like that, making it really spatial. But, ignoring that, the point is the Greeks didn't have any explanation for it. And it's not until there was an explanation for things being held to the earth that we can know and understand that the earth goes around the sun, because we got explanations for these questions and observations we must explain. Why don't things fly off the earth? So with gravity, we can explain that. Okay? So same thing here. There's a lot going on to the ecological approach that we hadn't thought of, and it helps us understand this. We've got to learn to bring these facts together that we didn't otherwise, just like bringing together the earth and sun moving to what it's like when you're on a ship and you drop something. As they explained, and as you learn in physics, as Galileo knew, when you're on a boat and it's moving, if you drop something, the boat's got the same relative motion as you. Wait, a ball. Okay, the boat. You drop a ball, you and a ball, you're holding a ball, you're on a boat, you drop the ball's going to fall at your feet because you both have the same relative motion in that short little context. With where air resistance is an irrelevant effect and so on. But if someone looks from off the boat, when you're on the boat, it looks like it's falling straight down. When you're off the boat, then you can see the ball traces a semi-parabolic path in that small limited context. So same thing with the ecological approach. We got to look at we got to find things that are similar to our learning. Look at animals and all this so we understand it. We can't just use words or ideas. We need to look at reality to get an understanding. So just like we were doing stuff wrong for a long time in regard to understanding the earth, so also we've been doing stuff wrong for a long time in regard to learning. The earth does what it does, whether or not we understand it. People learn and animals move through their environment in a certain way, regardless of what human understanding about it is. And it's a matter of getting our understanding consistent with the facts. The facts are always there, so you have to use them to do things right. Just because people had a Cartesian approach or people used some only direct instruction doesn't mean it was working. They were still having to rely on or depend on and like the way we actually learn and the way things work for it to happen. But with that confusion, you're not going to be as effective and you're going to contradict yourself. Just like people were still alive during the Nazi regime and during the communist regime, which is life wasn't very good. Some stuff happened. The Nazis did some stuff, so on and so forth. They were like the communists and the Nazis could kind of parasite off the good things humans had done, human history, what other cultures offered, and so on. They could get grain delivered and so on. They're relying on that to help them survive their mistakes, but that doesn't mean they're right. It doesn't mean it's effective. The effectiveness comes about in spite of what they believe, not because of it. So similar to other training going on, people do different things. It can seem like it's effective, but just as with some people, they go to school and the way they turn out, some geniuses, is not because of school, but it's in spite of school. They're independent thinkers. They learn on their own. They're not the kind that are told what to do. Stuff they get in school, they make their own. And they go beyond what is taught. There's a lot of things they weren't even taught that they figure out. You know, it's like not because of what they learned, but in spite of what they learned. And some people learn about some good thinking skills outside of school from some scientific reading and stuff like that. So it's more of an issue there. So we got to be careful about thinking, you know, that direct instruction actually works. You got to look at the bigger picture, as I said, what's actually happening, and what are people really doing when you give them direct instruction. And besides, you know, some direct instruction, yeah, of course. We know for a fact that some of that works. But when you stick to only that, or if you think that that's legit in the Descartesian thing or Platonic thing is what's going on, then you know, you're not effective, you're not efficient, and people aren't really being developed. And as I say, we know for a fact that some people take some martial arts, get a certain belt level, they're in their little, they're in their environment where there's certain rules, and they think they're invincible, and then they go out into the real world and get majorly hurt, you know. That actually happens. So some people, as we talked about, and as J.J. Gibson said, people believe these things, Platonic, Cartesian, and all that, but it's not what's actually going on. And if we're not consistent with the world, we're not going to be as effective. And then sometimes we'll be very ineffective, like the Nazis or communists or whatever. That's an extreme example. And no, I'm not calling some people a Nazi or communist. I mean, geez, give me a break, some people. I know most of y'all are fine. You get what I'm saying, but some people nowadays are so irrational. And so, you know, you say something and bam, it's like a Pandora's box of hate and lies just gets opened up. So, you know, I'm saying that right now on the record. Anybody says anything like that, like I'm calling them something that, it's on them. The hate and the lies is in them. But, you know, look at human history, look at modern life. We know that people are out there like that. So I got to deal with some of that. And for everybody out there who does also, you know, sorry about that, you know. Of course, it's not my fault, but, you know, I understand and commiserate and all that. I'm against it as you are. I'd like a better world. Now, let's see. A little more on this. Quote, training methodologies. Oh yeah, we did the CLA, cognitive approaches. Okay, yeah, and on that. Cognitive approach, it might not reflect real world scenarios. And so, as people point out, a simple example is like dribbling a ball through cones versus dribbling through people. You know, the people can just move around a little bit too, but you got evenly spaced cones. And you know, that's very limited in helping. It's not that that can't be done. It's just that, you know, at a certain level. But when you get to a certain level of competence, it's like irrelevant and totally unhelpful. It doesn't help you for a real game at all. Okay. Okay, dribbling, I mean like through football too, what the world calls football, to be clear. you're doing football, what Americans call soccer, and dribbling through cones at a certain point is not a good use of your time and doesn't really help. Okay. Quote, application in sports. Ecological approach encourages training in varied environments to develop adaptability and decision-making skills in athletes. Traditional methods may rely heavily on repetitive drills in controlled settings, which can limit the transfer of skills to competitive situations, unquote. And we know that's true. As we've talked about, given the context we've established, things are messy out there. There's not an average that we deal with, as Stephen Jay Gould said, and as we know from our experience. We deal with the variation, with certain measurements, with all kinds of degrees and variation in amount and degree and intensity. We don't deal with like the same thing. So we got to learn to adapt and decide, like do a OODA loop. And an OODA loop in a more rational ecological approach context, I don't agree with everything that Boyd said. Some of his philosophic influences, I have to see about what he actually believed and what he just used to influence what he did. But if he believed some of what I see are his philosophic influences, then, I think that some of that's a bunch of mumbo jumbo, philosophic mumbo jumbo. So, as long as we look at the OODA loop in context, as I say, of the ecological approach and direct awareness, things like that, I'm behind it. That's how I interpret it. That's how I think about it. That's how I use it. But we need decision-making skills. We need to think about constantly adapting to our environment, not just having an internal focus and trying to make ourselves do something kind of without respect to what's going on around the world. Then, then you get confused. You're internally doing something, you're going to go through the sequence of steps, and the world doesn't cooperate, and then you don't know what's going on. That's not a good way to train or think or coach. Okay. So, summary of differences. Aspect. I'll go over aspect, ecological approach, traditional approaches. So, one aspect is focus. And then the EA has a learner-environment interaction. Traditional approaches focus on internal cognitive processes. That's their focus. Learning principles. For the ecological approach, nonlinear and adaptive. For traditional, linear and structured. Training methodologies. For the EA, constraint-led, exploratory. For traditional, repetitive drills. Sports application. For the EA, varied environments for adaptability, traditional controlled settings. And now that we've discussed some of this, you have a better idea of what they mean by this. And it's so that's unquote. Okay, and it's contextual. What kind of nonlinear adaptive stuff you want to do in the ecological approach depends on the individual animal you're talking about. Are they new to some fitness thing or sport, some skill? Have they been doing it a long time? Are they young? Are they old? So, as it said, with a constraint-led approach, you modify the environment to enhance learning through exploration and adaptation. And you do that according to the individual animal you're talking about. Because that's what, as Gibson pointed out, affordances has to do with that individual and their needs and potentialities and everything. So what a 6-year-old needs, what you need to do to enhance their learning, could be to make it more simple and more seemingly linear and structured. And then go from there. But it's doing that kind of linear and structured thing in a broader context and with more going on than linear and structured all the time. As if because linear structure to be like everything's a geometric proof always, no matter how old you are or what level of skill you are. But the ecological approach says, nope, it's not. Okay. Finally, quote, the ecological approach promotes a more holistic view of learning, integrating environmental factors and real-world applications, which can lead to more effective skill development in various contexts, unquote. And that's been proven scientifically. You can listen to the Learning Scientist podcast and their research about learning. They talk about what it is to learn some skill, tennis, piano, martial arts, learn some things in school. It's not about what is true. They're not talking about logic and knowledge and understanding. They're just talking about learning on the Learning Scientist podcast. But of course, there's some things that come up in our learning and knowing and understanding that are naturally going to be reflected in learning knowledge properly. But I'll try to put a link to that in the description field too. And then you could look at research Rob Gray does or is talked about, or other people in the ecological approach, about how using real world situations is proven to help people learn better. It's not just someone talking stuff in their head. In regard to the CLA, a controlled learning environment, some stuff like that has been done in some ways. If you look at the work of the great educator Maria Montessori, I think some stuff she does is like that. It's like a controlled learning environment. She has, and I'll put some links to some stuff so you can see if you're not familiar with her, but she has a prepared environment. That's what she actually calls it, if I remember correctly. She's got devices young people use to learn on their own through the evidence of the senses, things about math, and then she's got things to help them learn to read and write. And of course, the teacher helps. It's not just like, and there's a heck ton thought behind it too. The teacher must be highly trained to be a good teacher and to do real Montessori, not fake Montessori or partial Montessori, but real Montessori. The teacher must be highly trained and know how to help the students really well. And they actually help. There is some direct instruction, but that's piggybacking, or I shouldn't say parasitizing, but piggybacking or working in context of the student getting it on their own. We're humans. Other humans are in our environment. We can help each other. We know that. It's a fact. But then the student is to learn on their own. Because in Maria Montessori, you got this prepared environment, the classroom, the school, certain students together. You got devices that are thought out and prepared to help the student learn certain things, and you got some devices that build on others. You learn some concept, and then something else can help you learn a more abstract concept, and so on and so forth. Just as with writing, students can learn first how to grab a knob on a cylinder. So that you got these cylinders, and there's different things you have. So there's cylinders that are different diameters, there's cylinders that are different heights. Then you have a container to put them in where the cylinder will fit. So you get these cylinders, the kid grabs them with 2 or 3 fingers, lifts them up, puts the cylinder in the right place, and it's what is it called? Like self-correcting. The student can see on their own, through their own experience, if it's right or not. They don't have to have someone else tell them it's wrong. You pick up a cylinder, you put it in the correct hole, and it's going to be flush. The top of the cylinder will be flush with the top of the container. Then maybe you get another one that's shorter, and you put it in, and you put in a bigger one so far, you put in a smaller one, and this one will be flush with the top. So this one might be staircase down by size, and students learn that, and everything else is the same. Everything is the same, it's just this one dimension changes, one variable. Or the cylinders are all the same height and everything, they're just different diameters, and students can see if they put the correct one in or not. Sometimes a cylinder won't fit in a hole, or sometimes it'll be too small and you can move around. So they're learning about some quantitative stuff, about volume when they're doing that, but they're learning about how to use their fingers to eventually hold a pencil. And then they also, to learn about using their senses, using direct experience to gather information, they will trace letters of different textures. You could have a letter A made of felt and one made of sandpaper and stuff like that. And they're learning through direct experience to distinguish and contrast these different textures and to find some that are similar, while they're learning the pattern of tracing a letter, like a script A or a non-script B and stuff like that. So they trace them a bunch of times, they're getting the pattern wired in. And there are some things like that that build up and come together into writing. And they learn to write first before they learn to read, so then they better grasp that reading, when I read, it's not my thoughts, it's someone else's thoughts. They've learned to write, and they're expressing their own thoughts in their writing, their thoughts and feelings, and they grasp independently and inductively what that is, and then they learn, this is what someone else did, I'm seeing what they thought. So there's this nice logical progression and development in there. It's a prepared environment, you got these things, it's like a CLA, and that can help you understand kind of what's going on with the EA in some of this. Looking at situations like that, they help you develop some skill, helps you develop the practice of BJJ or some other martial art or some sport. So I'll put some links about that too, because that'll help you get the idea of CLA if you want to look at that. Maybe you don't have time, need to focus on just CLA and BJJ or whatever. I don't have time for everything either. We are all limited and finite. We have our own needs and goals. So that helps us understand a little more about applying the EA to fitness, practicing sports, training sports, coaching it, or training or coaching BJJ. And let's see. An example that can help you get the ecological approach versus some of these others. This is one thing I've heard from a friend who teaches handgun and rifle to SWAT, police, special forces. He and some of his buddies in their company. So I'm going with them. I don't have personal experience with this. But from what I've heard, if I'm remembering the story right, one skill that dies out quickly is shooting a rifle in a moving helicopter in a moving vehicle. That's, sometimes someone learns something and they can maintain the skill in the future. But that's one thing I've heard that can die easily in like 3 or 6 months or so. People who do that have to continually keep up on it. It takes environmental adaptation. Because if the Descartesian thing was right, then, hey, we have some little dictator in our head that figures out the physics of our movement, the physics of the other movement, the trajectory of the bullet, wind speed and stuff like that. And bang, hey, once we learn it, big deal, we got it. And we can keep doing it for decades and decades. It's in us. We got it. We've done the calculations. We figured out what to do. We got the math down. But it doesn't work that way. We're animals. We have needs. We adapt. Neurological adaptation, other adaptations. We got to keep up on that. And so, to be able to shoot effectively, they've got to keep up on that. And again, even if that's not exactly, if I'm not remembering it right, you get the idea. It's a really good example to see how it's the ecological approach. The adaptation is what matters. There's a lot of calculations involved in that we need to know. We don't have to know the physics. People can figure out how to do that and can become good at it just by simple things that we would evolve to know. We'd look for simple, efficient invariance and some simple, efficient processing to be able to do something like that, even though it's really difficult. We wouldn't have some like super complex, sophisticated math going on to help us do that. That's not how we evolve. All right, now that's an example I wanted to bring up. Now about training. Here I will do some quotes from a book. Regardless of the martial art, what you think about these people or this art, just, think about martial arts in general and the content of it. These are some quotes from The Tao of Wing Chun by Xuan and Little. Dang, I forgot. I didn't write down their first names right here. John Little, but I'll put a link in the description field. So this guy's talking first of all about how a lot of people get Wing Chun wrong, and he's an expert in it. He's looked it up. He's studied it and knows more what's going on and how to properly use it in a fight and how to train it. But you'll probably know about maybe John Little, hopefully. I'll put some stuff in the description field so you can see about them, who they are, what their background is. But as they write in chapter 13, I listened on Audible. Now that we've heard about the EA and what it is in regard to training, this will make sense. So here we're talking about martial art in particular. Don't just think about Wing Chun, but think about fighting, BJJ, martial arts. As he says, quote, "Fighting is the art of managing both force and environment," unquote. Or, I'm going to say Wing Chun here, but substitute some other martial art. Think about it like that. Think about it abstractly. Quote, "Once you understand the Wing Chun concept of fighting, you can fight empty-handed, with weapons or without weapons, or against one or multiple opponents. The concept remains the same. You will automatically assess the situation and react appropriately rather than search your memory bank for pre-rehearsed scenarios that might be suitable for the situation you have now found yourself in," unquote. Think about variation, adaptation, decision making, the OODA loop conceived in an EA context. Think about measurements, variation, intensity, degree, amount. You have some scenarios that you do use, they inform your experience. But it's not like you flip through some cards and find the right one and do that exact thing. You know, you don't have some Cartesian thing. You're adapting to the situation. And, you know, think about it in light of what we said about the EA versus traditional approaches. Okay, quote, what I do with my other limbs and body parts would then depend on the situation at every moment that unfolds thereafter. But each movement will be executed with the same precision that the Tan Sao was designed for, and not simply from a predetermined set of actions that I learned in a martial arts class. In other words, I would make that decision instantly and tweak my Tan Sao and other body parts to fit the situation, instead of taking a snapshot of the situation and then attempting to match it with a scenario that I had practiced in class. If you rely on predetermined scenario techniques, you will never be able to amass enough of them. If you prepare for ground fighting, you may end up fighting standing up, or in the water, in the snow, or on the edge of a hill. If you prepare solely for knife fighting, you may end up facing a guy with a baseball bat instead. So what is the solution? The solution is to train in a universal system that has a good overall fighting concept that will prepare your mind and nervous system to deal with most, if not all, types of situations, unquote. In other words, you learn how to adapt to your environment in a masterly way after a lot of training, comprehensive, broad training. You don't just memorize a bunch of Cartesian scripts in your head. Let's see, got some other quotes here. But you see how what he's saying is consistent with the EA. Seems implicit. I don't know if he knows it exactly and explicitly. He did not mention it in the book, but he did mention biotensegrity. But, you know, you have only so much time to write a book. There can only be so many words and all that. So you cannot talk about everything you believe and all your premises or all your foundation. You got to focus on a certain topic, narrow things down to some concepts and develop those. Or here, I do, I guess, one more quote. Or yeah, I'll do two more. Okay, so those were some from, I think, chapter 13. Those quotes. Oh, and one from chapter 6. The last one was from chapter 6 of the Audible version. Now here's some from chapter 7. Again, whatever martial art. Quote, Wing Chun training does not prepare the practitioner for specific combative situations or environments, because these can be endless. Every opponent, situation, or environment will be different from the one that you practiced for at your Wing Chun school. Every sparring occurrence or fight will be different from their previous one, just as every chess, football, or hockey game will occur from previous ones. You just cannot replicate it. To think that a fight will go down exactly in the manner that you had trained for it, or that you will know ahead of time what your opponent will do, is simply wishful and unrealistic thinking, unquote. Quote, the danger inherent in this, following preset sequences, is that the student will then be programmed to respond mechanically rather than intuitively. The purpose of a drill is to repeat an action until it is ingrained in the practitioner's neural system. This way, the student needn't go through the slow process of thinking, but rather lets his subconscious mind automate the desired action. However, if a student is drilled to respond in a certain way, and the opponent doesn't follow the sequence of the drill that the student has been practicing, then the student is out of luck, unquote. All right, so there is a little more development about how to train the EA in fitness and BJJ, and specifically, and okay, here, let's look at this. Someone wrote about the ecological approach. I will read some of this so you can see, what people are saying. It's not just me. I'm not misinterpreting or anything like that. I'm looking at what Gibson say, what Rod Gray says. It's not my made up stuff. Here, it's by an article by Bobby Bradshaw about the ecological approach to training. And we could look at this in light of what we've already learned and what I've said. So, technique, so ecological approach, explanation, he's identifying 6 things about it. Okay, task constraints, technique variability, quote, instead of teaching technique in a very structured step-by-step manner, an ecological approach might encourage variability. Practitioners learn to adapt techniques based on the opponent's response, promoting creativity and problem solving on the mat. For example, a coach might set up a scenario where students must grapple without using their dominant arm, forcing them to explore alternative techniques or adapt existing ones, end quotes. And again, it's based on the individual. So for someone who's not very creative or you're having trouble with, what do they need? What are their affordances for that particular individual and animal? They might need more step-by-step. You need to tell them more what to do. But the telling is not for everybody. And still that person needs to learn to adapt to their own environment. Even if you're telling something, it's not the words that did it. It's you're breaking things down and giving them smaller environmental experiences. That's a good way to think about it. What's going on in the real world? What's really going on? It's not a matter of what we believe is going on, but what is really going on. Okay. Quote 2, environmental constraints. Training environment. The training environment is manipulated to challenge athletes in different ways. This could mean changing the size of the mat area, introducing different ground surfaces, or varying the number of opponents in a session. This variability trains adaptability and decision making in real time, much like in actual combat scenarios where conditions are rarely ideal. 3, individual constraints. Personal attributes. This involves tailoring training to the physical and psychological attributes of each individual. For instance, one practitioner might have longer limbs, influencing their approach to leverage and positioning. The ecological approach would use these attributes to guide their training, focusing on techniques where these physical traits give an advantage, unquote. Exactly. Whereas for a fact in some martial arts and some group classes, everyone does the same thing. You do this, go through these steps and stuff, do it in the same way, but we all have individual differences. We need to recognize these individual differences are real, as Stephen Jay Gould talked about. They are the reality, not the average. Quote 4, perception-action coupling, decision-making and action. This principle highlights the importance of linking perception directly to action. In jiu-jitsu, it translates to recognizing patterns in an opponent's movement or posture and immediately responding with the most effective counter. Drills might involve scenarios where students must react to spontaneous movements rather than predictable sequences, unquote. So here we're seeing how to use the EA to train jiu-jitsu and other things, getting more into detail. And then you can think about this in different, for different martial arts, for different particular things. We can't cover everything in here. This is just to see what the EA is. This is not coaching or training, okay, as we know. Okay, quote 5, nonlinear pedagogy, learning through exploration. Rather than a linear progression from basic to advanced moves, learning is seen as a dynamic, exploratory process. Coaches might set up problems for students to solve in sparring, encouraging them to discover solutions through trial and error, which can lead to more profound learning and retention of skills. Unquote. And that'd be part of it. Again, it looks at who the individual is, what they need, and so on and so forth. What level of competence they're at. Because with the CLA, it's got to be adapted to the individual and their level, or to if you get a variable, you got a range of measurements, let's say from 0 to 100, and still if some people can be grouped together, and you can have some CLA adaptation to this group that helps, like you got the, let's say, competence measure, some people are learning, so they're maybe from 5 to 15, and so, you don't got to go, oh, I've got to get like a CLA that's at 7.342 for this person. No, it can be like 5 to 15. If these group of people are about the same, then how you adapt it can be within this range of measurements, this interval. Whereas this wouldn't work for people who are up in the 90s. You have to adapt things differently, have a different prepared environment for them. But for this group, they're about the same, so something could work. And again, you're looking at a range, not an average. Okay? So it's focusing on the individuals and what they're about ready to do, and not being Platonic or Cartesian or anything like that. Okay, quote 6 affordances, opportunities for action. The concept of affordances in jiu-jitsu training involves recognizing what actions are possible for the given current situation. For an example, if an opponent stands up, the affordance might be to pull guard or go for a takedown, depending on the positioning and movement of both practitioners. Unquote. So, I'll put this up so you can read it yourself, go slower, think about it more, think about different things in BJJ or karate or baseball or whatever that each of these is relevant to. And think about how some of these statements apply to BJJ or some martial art or some sport. So, let me get my notes again. Where did they go? Here we are. All right, so there's an intro in how to apply EA to fitness and sports. We've been talking about it all along with invariance and all that, and affordances, and the evidence of the senses, direct awareness, adaptation. And then here we got a little more detail with some of the quotes from the Tao of Wing Chun, and from that article about some principles of the EA. Now it's just up to us to understand and practice this more, each on our own, and in communicating with others, training others, coaching, teaching. Learn what this really means, what Gibson said and what's going on in reality, remembering to be scientific about it. It's not some 10 commandments laid down from on high. This is science. Some of it's philosophy, and that's still knowledge and reasoning and understanding, which we can learn. And we have mistakes we can correct, And then in the science, we'll see what's developed, what's been proven, what's right, what's wrong. What can we do? What does it mean? We each do that on our own, apply it to our sport and everything.